And welcome back to A.R. Tales, aka the A.R.T. podcast. I am A.R. Mirabal, and today we are joined with a heavyweight, author of over 40 books. People, that is not a game, that is not an estimate. Charles Alexander Moffat, author of the Korovia series, the Wrathgar adventures. Here in the flesh, he is an artist, archery instructor, editor, father, and sorry to break it to you, ladies, but he's married. He's taken. All right. I know you're gonna hear everything's about to come out of this man's mind and go like, man, where can I go? Where? But nope, already taken. Hands off. Without any further ado, Charles, how are you doing today?
I'm okay. It's a nice, beautiful day out here.
Gorgeous, honestly. It's the stuff of, that's probably where Tolkien went to like start thinking about Mid-Earth and everything from there.
I have some theories about where he started thinking about it.
Ooh, yeah. Please do tell.
Well, I think he was heavily influenced by World War II because he started writing that the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings around like 1937, and he didn't finish until after World War II was over. So I think there's definitely some influences there from the war and some symbolism going on. Not necessarily allegory, because he despised allegory, but there's definitely some symbolism that he took from real life.
Man, that's fascinating. I didn't know anything that he didn't like allegory. I mean, his book, The Simulacrum, isn't that an allegory?
Well, you see, that's the argument. He says that he doesn't like allegory, and yet there's a lot of symbolism within his work. So, yeah, it's open to interpretation.
I didn't expect to start the podcast with like such a meta conversation, but this just is something that I've only spoken with a couple of peers, a couple of friends that are authors, and I really think that it's almost obvious what I'm going to say, but the types of wars and what's happening in the world has such a distinct effect on the writing. I remember when I was in English class in high school, and we would be reading a book and they would start talking about the author's time frame. In the back of my head, I'm like, yo, why does that matter? Why does any of that matter? How does the author's life have anything to do with writing? Of course I was foolish. I was in high school. I just said to myself, I was an idiot. It has
There's
everything.
Always like little things. There's little things that leak in there. I'll give you an example. I was at my wife's, sorry, I don't know what to call it. It's like a convocation thing for when you become a lawyer. So you get to basically almost like the graduation, but you're getting called up to the bar and there's like a ceremony thing. I forget what it's called, but there was a guy, they called out his name, and he went up on the stage and receives his thing or whatever. But his name was Volodymyr. And I looking at this name Volodymyr, and I was like, that's a cool name. I like that name. And then I made that Volodymyr a character in a book, which would be this one here.
Dope.
And I made him a mercenary captain who just wants to retire. And he's so his primary motivation, he wants one more big score, and then he's gonna retire somewhere and then not have to do any more mercenary work. That's his goal. And he's the bad guy. So I gave him the backstory of like a cop who's got like, I got 3 days left until retirement. I'm good. I'm gonna like quit. I'm gonna like relax and do some other stuff and not have to do any of this work anymore. I've got 3 days left. This is good. All I have to do is stay alive. Now he's the bad guy, of course, so of course he's doomed. But I had fun with that. And the Volodymyr, I was like, okay, that works for me. And this was before I found out that the president of Ukraine, his first name, it's Volodymyr and then Zelensky. So I was like, oh, that's that name again. And now I kind of regret making the villain named Volodymyr.
Whoops. Oh my God, yeah. And the funny thing too is that I can imagine that people come up to you and goes like, oh, why did you name the villain after a political head of the Ukraine? Yeah, political head of the Ukraine. Is like, no, there was a guy at my wife's ceremony. All right, I didn't know anything about him, but that's where he's based off. No political. Yeah, that's exactly nothing political here.
And then there's other things like that, like just the name Wrathgar. I came up from that from a video game. I was watching a video game.
Which one?
So I was playing a video game years ago. This is back in like 1999, 2000, and I came up with the name because it was in the game. There was a character called Wrathgar with an H at the beginning, and then I did some research on the name, and it was the name of a character from Beowulf. And I was like, oh, okay, so here's this like King Wrathgar character. And then I just changed the name slightly to make it Wrathgar. So it sounds like he's angry, but he's actually not. Wrathgar almost never loses his temper. The name is a bit of a
misnomer.
Yeah. I'm deliberately playing with the idea that he has a temper, but he actually doesn't. Like he almost never loses his temper. Like in 5 books that I've written so far, well, 6 if you count the little novelette thing. He only once loses his temper and like swears at a halfling. So yeah, that's it. Like he doesn't really lose his temper much. But I'm playing with that idea that he has a temper, but it's very rarely used. And then I push the idea at the same time that he's a barbarian, which in Dungeons and Dragons terms means that he's supposed to have a temper, but he's not really a barbarian in the normal sense. He's more like a ranger. So I'm playing back around with these ideas of what it means to be a barbarian versus what it means to be a ranger. And yeah, I'm having fun with it. And then even his father, Wulfric. So I will sometimes refer him as like Wrathgar, son of Wulfric. And there's a whole series of separate short stories and novellas and everything with Wulfric as the main character. And Wulfric, that goes back to Beowulf and Siegfried and Sigurd and all these like those types of names. So I'm having fun with those as well. So there's the Beowulf versus Wulfric, and then Wrathgar, and then Wrathgar. And you got to be careful like pronouncing the names, so you don't confuse them. And then, well, you say like, okay, well, where did you come up with Wulfric? And it was Harry Potter. I was watching the one scene. I was in the movie theater. I was watching the one scene, and Dumbledore says what his full name is. And it's like Albus, Percival, Wulfric, Brian, Dumbledore. And I'm like, Wulfric, that's a cool sounding name. I got to use that for something. And that's where I came out with the name for Wulfric, the Wanderer. But it's just little things like that come up. And you're like, oh, I got to use that. That's a cool sounding name. I got to use Wulfric.
You know, that's an interesting little side bar, however you want to call it. The naming of certain characters. And I think it happens for either way you go. Even if you go back in time or forward in time, you always have to make up some crazy names. And every so often, I'll be asked, why not just name them John or Bill or something like that? It's because John or Bill, 200, even just 200 years right now, would have been weird. You would have been that. Well, I guess not John. I mean, Johns are kind of like everless, and Bill, short of William. But for the most part, there were no Zaydens, there were no Jadens. Like these are names that we've come up with now, and they're normalized because they're now. So if you're thinking about any time frame, either forward or backwards, you have to. And I'll be honest, sometimes I feel silly myself. There are certain names that I love, and there's certain times I'll come up with a word, a name, and it's like, all right, that's. What can we do? It definitely sounds a lot cooler than how it was in my head, honestly.
It was a trick naming my son too. Like when my son was born, my wife and I debated a very long time about the name until we finally found like a name that we both liked. So that was definitely an issue there. Like it's bad enough when you're naming a character in a book and I have to basically agree with myself. It's a totally another thing when you're naming a baby and you have to agree with your wife on what's a good name for your kid.
Exactly. And
I wanted a whole bunch of weird, different names, and my wife was like, "No, those names are too weird. We're not naming our kid that."
When I was in high school, I was obsessed with the Egyptian lore and history and all those aspects, and I was dead set that I was going to call my son Horus. Dead set. Horus, yeah, Horus. H-O.
Horus.
Exactly. And then when I got older, I was like, can you imagine the trauma I'd put my child through if the first couple syllables of their name had whore in it? Jesus.
Yeah.
We live in a society. We know what the deal is. That would be a horrible middle school
Yeah.
upbringing.
I vetoed some names there when my wife was suggesting names. I was like, nope, we're not calling our kid that. And I would give reasons
Out of my
why.
house. Yeah. Well,
That's a veto right there. That's not happening.
well, you brought up something that I really loved before about the whole how generations are influenced by what's happening in the time frame, especially during the developmental years. You used the great reference point of Tolkien and the World War, but one that I always use was Dr. Seuss in the World War. He was also in the World War, and not only that, he had a gruesome position. I always hear different stories of what he was doing, but I heard that he was one of the people that actually retrieved the bodies from a foxtrot afterwards that they've been so like your friend just died and he was the person that went and fought through gunfire to pull him out and to be able to get the dog tags and all those things. So he saw the lowest, if you ask me, of what humanity can be. And then a couple years from that, he wrote Cat in the Hat. So the ways that people are affected by what happens to them is just insane. And I think we're seeing a reverberance of that with COVID. I talk to a lot of my author friends, and we all say that we come from a similar class because all of us started from around the same time that of COVID, where it was just that thing of like, oh, well, we have a lot of free time. Let me now pursue this thing that I have been fantasizing about for years. And how it's influenced people is just insane. So it makes me wonder, do you think it has influenced any of your writing? Have you seen the influence in your friends?
I would say everybody's going to be influenced by this in the future. We're going to see, I think, a lot of dystopian science fiction books in the future where there's like a disease at the same time during the next 20 to 30 years. I think that's going to be pretty popular. I think we're going to see some fantasy books where there's a plague happening at the same time. Probably some historical fiction books taking place during the Black Death. I think that's going to be like a huge phenomenon as far as literary works go. I honestly want to stay away from that. I have one book, like a short story or a novelette that I have that it takes place during a plague, but that's in the background. I leave that in the background and I don't really touch on that topic because I don't want to be one of those authors that like gets stuck in that like, okay, like I'm going to focus on this because of what's happening in real life. I want to actually avoid that topic. So I can have it in the background, that's okay, but I don't want to actually have it in the foreground as like that's a part of like a major part of the plot. It's to me it's dungeon dressing. It's just background information to be avoided as much as possible. Like the plague. Avoid talking about the plague like it's the plague. There we go.
Dungeon dressing. That's an awesome term for that. I should start using that in the future now. Dungeon dressing. That's actually like beautiful.
Yeah, that's a D&D reference there. You'll when you're playing a D&D game, if you're the DM and you're running the game and you're reading out like a module or you design your own game, your own adventure, then you have to basically you're telling a story, but it's an interactive story. So you have to think of it on that level. And I'll give you an example. There's an Ed Greenwood module called The Haunted Halls of Evening Star. And when you go through that dungeon, there's this one room where there is a chain dangling from the ceiling. Okay. So you got this big, huge, like, I think it's like a bronze chain or something like that. And it's just like dangling from the ceiling. It has no purpose aside from a joke that Ed Greenwood, the guy who created the module, is actually doing. So the players will get there, the player characters, and they'll get to that one room and they'll look at this chain and go like, okay, what is this? And they'll try climbing it. They'll try detect magic on it. They'll try to identify it, which is a different spell to try to determine if it does anything. And they'll try yanking on it. And they'll spend an inordinate amount of time trying to ponder this chain and like yanking on his chain. And meanwhile, it's actually just a joke. They've been yanking on Ed Greenwood's chain for the last 30, 40 years from anybody playing that module. When they get to the chain and they start yanking on it, they're just yanking Ed Greenwood's chain every time. And that is just, to me, that was like, it's dungeon dressing, but it's funny at the same time. And I have met Ed Greenwood multiple times because he lives here in Toronto. And the next time I see him, I'm gonna like shake his hand and be like, I really enjoyed your yanking on your chain, sir.
He doesn't remember. He immediately just goes like, "What the is wrong with this man?" Like,
he'll remember.
Does one of these?
He'll know. He knows what he knows exactly what he did when he created that.
My God.
But there's little things. There's little, like when you read modules like that. There's little things like that where it's he's just doing like some trickery in there. When you get to the entrance to that dungeon, there's this really large ballista, or sorry, like a large crossbow. So like it's almost like a ballista, and it's set up in front of like a pile of treasure. So there's the crossbow's over there, and the people walk in the front door and they see this pile of treasure there, and it just looks like a trap, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, oh, if we go near the treasure, the ballista will go off, and then we'll get shot, right? That's what it looks like it's going to do. And then once they finally explore the place, they find out the ballista doesn't actually work. It's just like rusted and broken. But it creates the illusion that it would have done that. And so that's another way that like characters will end up wasting their time, having entered the dungeon and then be like, oh, this looks like a trap. How do we disarm this trap? It's way over on the other side of the room. I don't know. We don't want to step on anything that triggers it, right?
Now,
but and from my perspective, you can use that as a storytelling device. So you can have that in a story, in a book, and say, okay, here's something that looks like a trap and it's actually not. But you could waste like half a chapter on that because it's funny. So honestly, it really depends on whether you're writing comedic fantasy or not. Some of these things can be really funny done right. And it just depends on how you do it.
Man, you know what? That just made me think, and my God, I was going to show so much of my vanity, but it made me think of a scene, and I can't say that I did it right, but it made me think of like what you're describing is what I try to do in with one of my scenes. There was one time that we're doing like the whole like, oh, we have a plan, let's execute it, right? And the whole thing is that a plan never goes according to plan, right? Nothing ever goes exactly how it's supposed to, ever. And
it's never like the A-Team.
Exactly. And that speaks to one life, it speaks to reality, and it speaks to just like lengthening the plot. But for whatever reason, I had this idea that instead everything does go to plan, and the characters are aware of this and are mind blown. Like, just like, it's like, how is this happening so perfectly? And it's almost like humorous because they're going through the steps, and even certain scenarios where they didn't have a full roundabout plan, that things just happen in their favor, and they're just there like, I don't understand this. How is this happening? And I actually got that from, out of all places, 22 Jump Street or 21 Jump Street, I believe, where they're going through and they're having like the big highway chase, and every time that they make like a bang or a boom or they hit something, they expect an explosion, but no explosion comes up, and it was like, oh man, I could have sworn that was going to be an explosion, like how there always is in a movie when there's a huge chase scene, but nothing ever happened. And I kind of love that. I kind of love the expectance that you see a trope like that, but then it doesn't happen ever. It doesn't ever pay out, and there's a humor in that.
Yeah, you got to have that level of realism there. Like one of the ones that I really don't like is this idea like a cigarette can light gasoline on fire.
I say this all the time.
That you see in movies. Except cigarettes actually don't burn hot enough to light gasoline on fire.
Yep.
So it doesn't actually work in real life. So to me, like if I was to be like writing a comedy, I'd be like, yeah, the bad guy's trying to light the place on fire using throwing cigarettes at it, and he throws the whole pack at it, like he's just can't get it go. Finally, he's like, okay, I'm gonna light the lighter and then throw it, and the lighter goes out. And then he walks over there, picks up the lighter, and then like accidentally does a spark, and that's what lights it on fire, and then the whole thing explodes and he's dead. And that's how you kill one bad guy.
What's too, and like is that I always view writing like I'm writing like I'm just putting the words down of like a movie that's playing out in my head. So like we could do is like a jump cut too, where like the big bad guy does like a scene. He like he like they have the good guy like surrounded and like gasoline dripping everywhere, and he goes like, "Well, I'll see you in your next life, brother." Drops a cigarette, walks away, and then it just cuts. And the reader automatically thinks that the bad thing happened. And then the next scene is like the character, having him in the opposite way, and like it's the bad guy being like, "Oh, what happened?" And it goes like a jump cut of like when he like dropped the cigarette, it just got wet by the gasoline, and then the bad guy just like sat there for such a long time that the sprinklers eventually came out, and then he just like got away by like took like an Uber home, just very casual, nothing crazy at all. I don't know. I think just playing with a reader's point of view and just perception of things is a beautiful writing term. It's what you were talking about the ballista. It's just when you see certain things, you just expect it, especially that literature as a topic has been around forever. So these tropes that we're talking about aren't new by any degree. All we're doing is taking stories and mushing them about and putting as much of our point of view into them to make them different. But for the most part, literature is literature. And like you see these tropes and your mind immediately goes like, "Oh, this was going to happen." And as a writer, just changing that up a little bit, I think is so fun, honestly.
One of the things that I enjoy is that my characters will sometimes need to go to the bathroom. And that in itself can lead to like something that like a funny scene. So it really depends on like how much humor you want to put in your writing. There's a scene that some of my fans have like commented on from like the Coven's Wolves. Yeah, you look at this and you're like, okay, this looks like a horror book or something like that, and it's a murder mystery. There is like some scary bits with wolves in it, but I also have comedy in there. So it's like I feel like maybe I should have given it a different name sometimes, because like, okay, yes, there's the Coven in it, there's the wolves in it. That's definitely happening in terms of the plot, but there's also funny stuff going on at the same time, and it's I enjoy that aspect of playing with the comedy and then juxtaposing that with horror or tragedy, so that like honestly that those things seem so much worse once you get to like the characters and say, oh, okay, you got all these like funny comedic bits and you like the characters, and then when you get to tragedy, you're just like, ah, damn it, why'd you kill that character? No. Or, oh my god, this is horrific. Oh my gosh, what's happening here? It's just, yeah, you can have so much fun with that as a writer. And then that to me is the kind of books that I want to read too, where yes, you have lovable, enjoyable characters, and yes, okay, bad stuff happens to them, but at the end of the day, I'm writing heroic fantasy, so the hero is supposed to win at the end. Supposed to.
Yeah, no, I honestly love that, and that's the whole thing. Is I think everyone to a certain degree despises hero armor. Like no one should be a Mary Sue, but when it's done correctly, that you feel like the hero is genuinely giving their all and like going by their teeth, that is phenomenal. When you have something that like it's just a character ramboing through everything, like in the third Taken, he kills the last bad guy by doing one of these, hits him in the chin, and the bad guy just dies. He just cools over, and that was the final boss scene. And I'm just like, wow. You see, the first one was like very believable, and now the third one is just like, nah, I don't really have the same emotional tie to the character because I feel like he can't die.
Yeah, there's certain things like that where I'd be more likely to play with it and be like, okay, I'm gonna change this around, and I'm gonna give the villain hero armor to make the villain like basically an indestructible. No spoiler alerts here.
Definitely not. People need to pick up the book out on Amazon, amazon.com/author/Moffat, Moffat. Make sure to check up on that Korovia series. I mean, ladies and gentlemen, if you're not sold to this, I don't know I don't know what more you could want in life. Just the fantastical elements of the writing juxtaposed with the just obvious wit that Charles is like can command. These books need to be, honestly, you need to tear through them. I know I'm going to. This definitely has the stamp of must read immediately. I need to make, what is that? MRE? Isn't that like the acronym for like something medical or something like that? Whatever. We'll find another acronym, but must read now. We'll leave it like that. MRN. MERN. All right. Must read
MRI. Now. Must read immediately would be MRI. Yeah, that's definitely medical term.
Yeah. Maybe not that one. MRN sounds a little bit better. Must read now. And without a single doubt, I honestly can't think of the last time that I did a recording and I legitimately was blown away by how much time. I felt like this has been 15 minutes, but we're actually approaching the 40-minute mark right now, which is just blowing my mind. Yeah, this has flown away. There's still so many questions, but to me, all that means that we need to get you back as soon as possible. The Korovia series, The Adventures of Wrathgar, folks, you got to get on this. All right. And like I said, 40 books, they're not all available. And I actually want to get into that because there's some that he has just straight taken off, which is not something I hear often from authors, but just the pure fact that he has so much content that he's willing to take a few out speaks to the magnitude of how much he's writing. It's prolific, honestly. And
yeah, I've been writing since the early 90s.
God.
And publishing since the early 90s. So it's been over 30 years, basically. It's just, I've reached the point where I'm taking books off the market that are old that I want to rewrite. That's really what it comes down to.
Wow.
I don't want those books out there right now. I want to rewrite them and re-release them. That's the quick answer.
My God, that's good problems to have. That's like having too much money in your pockets. It's like, man, I wish I had that issue. My God, unfortunately, we're getting to the end of the recording here, and I say unfortunately with some true sincerity right now, because my God, I can keep on talking about even just Dungeons and Dragons for a couple hours, because for the amount of imagination that just like brings into it. I want to ask that too. You know what? We'll leave that as a cliffhanger. Next time that we talk, I'm definitely gonna go into the whole Dungeons and Dragons versus writing chicken or egg. What came first? You know, did the Dungeons and Dragons start and you wanted to write stories from there, or were you already writing and then you got into Dungeons and Dragons? Because I feel like that right in itself, every person I've spoken to that does Dungeons and Dragons has an insane mind for writing, and their books are always phenomenal. And just hearing just your own wit as a person, I'm telling you, Korovia series, and for the people that are just listening, the covers are phenomenal. Honestly, just whoever is doing the cover artist, my hat off, my shirt off until it gets weird. And he's doing it himself, folks. This is real life right now. We're hearing this in the flesh. Who knows? Next episode, maybe he'll even show off some of the archery skills too. But unfortunately, this is gonna have to be the end of the recording. This has been phenomenal. Make sure to follow him on Instagram. 10,000 followers. It's a true testament that he really has been doing this for 90 years. 90 years since the 90s. But you know, in our head, you know, like writing for 90 years.
Over 30 years.
Over 30 years. Since the 90s, I meant over 30 years, and it shows. Thank you. This is going to be the end of the episode. AR's Tales, aka the ART podcast. I've been AR. This has been Charles. Make sure to check back with us next week when we talk to another creative, another peer, talking about the craft and everything they love. What more could you want? And on that note, peace out.